Welcome, everyone. We are so pleased to welcome our next presentation of a wonderful new Missouri cookbook that's not just one with recipes, but with history and a place that we like to call the People's House. Rebecca Gordon, the Executive Director for Friends of Missouri Governor's Mansion, is here to tell us about their new book, available for purchase, A Spoonful of History, a culinary tour of Missouri and our Governor's Mansion, released in commemoration of the Missouri bicentennial and the 150th anniversary of the Missouri Governor's Mansion. And if you enjoy learning about Missouri's culinary cuisine, stick around with us because right after Rebecca's talk, we will hear about a new podcast titled Hungry for Missouri. So we welcome to the Center for Missouri Studies, Rebecca Gordon.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. I am actually going to step over here in front of the podium. I'm not very tall, even in my heels, and I can't see around it. So I tend to like to get in front of the podium. If I can do that without tripping this afternoon. Welcome. I am so thrilled to be here. Like she mentioned, my name is Rebecca Gordon. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of the Missouri Governor's Mansion. And 150 years ago, the state of Missouri spent $75,000 and some change to build our current governor's mansion. The first person to actually occupy the home. Well, let me back up a little bit and tell you a bit about the mansion. So it is actually the third building on the site. And the second mansion had been needing to be rebuilt, fixed, put together since the Civil War. But we ran into the Civil War and finally get past the Civil War, and it's decided that we need a new building. We go back and forth, and Governor B. Gratz Brown was the first one to move into the governor's mansion in January of 1872. B. Gratz Brown is one of my favorite governors because he's quite interesting and quite the character. He is the last known governor to actually participate in a duel. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about him so we can talk about the family before we get into the culinary studies that we did the past 2 years. B. Gratz Brown was a senator, and back in the day before Twitter, the way we would get into fights is via newspaper articles. And so him and a friend, and they were fighting about slavery, were writing articles back and forth. And it finally got so bad that they could no longer keep it in the paper, and his friend called him out, another senator called him out for a duel. Now, it took him a long period of time to decide what to do. Is it going to be long guns, short guns? What are we going to do? How many paces do we need to step away from? Is it 10? Is it 20? They finally came to an agreement. Now, unfortunately, dueling was now outlawed in the state of Missouri and the state of Illinois. That did not stop them. They found a sandbar on the Mississippi, and they finally counted off their paces, turned around, and unfortunately, B. Gratz Brown is a terrible shot, and he missed, and his opponent shot him in the knee. And from that point on, now I find it interesting, from that point on, can you imagine an 1840s bullet knee wound? But he gets back over to Missouri, and law enforcement said, you guys were in Illinois, it's not our problem. And Illinois said, you were in Missouri, not our problem. So they got away with it. B. Gratz Brown walked for the rest of his life with a limp, but he was a very, very interesting character. He met his wife walking through Jefferson City. She was from Jefferson City. And if you go to the governor's, who's been to the governor's mansion? Oh, good. So get your questions ready because I'd love to answer any sort of stories. I'm glad to see so many people have visited. So if you look right outside of the gate across the street at the mansion, there are row houses there. And those row houses were actually the Brown family farm. And so he met his wife while she was swinging on the gates of the old mansion. That old mansion, when B. Gratz Brown took office, was called the Old Rookery. It was mentioned, that old rookery, that awful building. It was a shambles and falling down. And so finally, the state of Missouri appropriated the $75,000 and some change and built our current governor's mansion. B. Gratz Brown, the beautiful pillars out front, the pink pillars, B. Gratz Brown started the tradition of giving a gift to the mansion. And so he actually had those quarried, shipped them in, got them to the mansion, and realized that they were too short. So when students come to visit us, in normal years, 50 to 60,000 students come and visit us, we like to remind them how important it is to measure twice just to cut once. So they enjoy that little story. So we're here celebrating Missouri's bicentennial, and back in 2019, First Lady Parson pulled us all together. The mansion was closed for a major renovation, one that had been needed for years. Before we shut down the mansion, when we would take people up to the second floor for tours, which is something that Mrs. Parson has done, opening the house, we would go to the second floor, and her and I were giving a tour to a group, and I kept hearing a noise. It sounded like rain. And I looked out the window and I'm like, nope, it's sunny. And I'm looking at her like, can you hear that, ma'am? Do you hear that noise? And she's looking at me and she's going, yeah. And finally, I look back over my shoulder and there's a big drop of water coming from the ceiling, dropping to the floor. And they're big drops. And it wasn't from rain outside. It was from condensation on pipes over a period of time that had been put in. And it was actually throughout the mansion we were getting a lot of water damage. So the Parsons were generous enough to move into the house, turn around and move right back out, and allow us to shut down the building for 5 months to fix those things. I can tell you, we are thrilled to say it no longer rains in the mansion, and those floors and everything is taken care of. But while Mrs. Parson was out on a secondary site where they lived for a while, she called Friends of the Missouri Governor's Mansion and mansion staff over and said, we all sat down and had lunch. We worked with the culinary team from the mansion, and she said, I want to do something special to celebrate the bicentennial, but also the mansion's 150th birthday. And so we got together and thought, how else? What a better way to do it, but by sharing hospitality and food, and how Missouri is really transformative in the food business and in the food arena. And we host people from all over the state, country, and world and feed them at the mansion. And so we wanted to share some of those stories and some of those recipes directly from the mansion with Missourians. So that's where the idea came from. And there's a picture of us all sitting there in 2019. Mansion is shut down, and we get going. Who did we go to? We really wanted to represent all corners of the state. And we found some really, really interesting things. We found Chillicothe as the home of sliced bread, which is amazing. We found out about old mills. We were able to go and figure out and really look at the industries in Missouri that really, really feed America. And so it was a really, really fun journey. So we get moved back into the house, and it is the October of 2019, and we sit down and we start thinking about all of the stories of the mansion, how it's changed over the years, what it looked like, what the pieces and parts of the mansion are that make so much sense to us today. And so one of my favorite things, and the younger girls at the mansion didn't know this, as I was growing up, there was always a picture in our home of the mansion painted white. And not a lot of people, younger people, remember when it was painted white. But what we didn't realize is that is not the only color the governor's mansion has been. So the original that you see today is a very nice, beautiful pink color. But before that, that was how it was built. But because of the coal and all of the different energy sources used, it got very dirty very quickly. And so actually, Governor Crittenton painted the house red. It was a brick red color, and Governor Crittenton, to kind of clean it up, painted it red, and they painted it red for years and years and years. Well, so in the Stark, moving on into the 1930s, they were tired of the red, and there was a major renovation. About every 30 years, we have to do a major renovation to the governor's mansion. Something goes wrong. You got to take care of those old buildings, right? So anyway, Mrs. Stark, are you guys familiar with the Golden Delicious apple? That is Mrs. Stark and her family, her husband's family, and they moved in and did major renovations. First of all, they put carpet throughout the entire first floor. They also, if you've been in the mansion, you remember the lady that stands at the bottom of the staircase. She's beautiful, but she was considered too risque at the time, so they removed her. And so in old pictures of the mansion, you're going to see on that newel post a bowl of fruit or a bowl of flowers, because the newel post lady was taken down. Unfortunately, she was lost over time. But they finally found the mold, so we were able to recreate her and put her back and run electricity through her. But anyway, so Mrs. Stark, she did a couple of other things. She added some beautiful chandeliers to the first floor. There are 3 of them. They're called the Stark chandeliers or the dancing chandeliers. And if you go upstairs now, they're now on the 2nd floor, and they're beautiful crystal chandeliers. Mrs. Stark was so proud of her chandeliers that she wouldn't let anybody else clean them. I would have been so proud of the chandeliers that I would have let other people clean them so I didn't mess them up, but, to each their own. Anyway, these beautiful chandeliers, she comes home one day and looks up, and her chandeliers are swinging. She's like, good heavens, what is going on? So she goes in search of the problem. She gets upstairs and she finds her son and a friend are learning a new dance of the day called the Big Apple, which I find to be funny, and those chandeliers were dancing. She made them stop dancing, and the chandeliers stopped swaying, but now we call them, of course, the Stark chandeliers, but then also we like to tell the Big Apple story, considering the fact that they did create the golden delicious apple. So that's kind of fun. Anyway, Mrs. Stark, in part of her renovations, painted the mansion white. Stark white is what we called it, and it stayed that way until Mrs. Betty Hearns came into the house and did another major renovation. So when Betty Hearns comes in, finally we had the technology to remove the layers of paint without destroying the stonework underneath. And so then, under the Hearns administration, it went back to its original color that we see today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this book. We put it up, yep, see, this is a height thing again. So A Spoonful of History, celebrating, and you'll be able to find these, we have copies out front in the lobby, is a wonderful picture book, and going through it, telling all of the stories of the mansion and of the food. One of the things, when B. Gratz Brown moved into the mansion in January of 1872, they moved into the mansion and 2 days later had their first visitors, thus starting us off with our history of hospitality at the mansion. Those visitors were very important people. It was General George Custer, before he was a general, with the Grand Duke Alexei, and they were on a train trip across the United States. So if you can imagine, all of a sudden, here come these 2 glorious guests for lunch. You've just moved your family in, and here they come. A few days after that, we hosted over 2,000 people at the governor's mansion for our first big party. And can you imagine doing all of that in a very short period of time? The funny thing is that Jefferson City didn't have enough hairdressers. And so for weeks, ladies in Jefferson City and around town were sleeping, sitting upright after getting their hair done so that they could maintain their looks for their party. Another governor I'm going to tell you about, and we tell the story in here. If you've been to the governor's mansion, you have seen the fountain, the children's fountain that First Lady Carnahan put in. And on top of that is Carrie Crittenton. And she was a little girl, the only little girl we believe to have passed in the mansion. And she was the daughter of Governor and Mrs. Crittenton. Governor and Mrs. Crittenton are also some of our favorite people. And if you've heard in the mansion, on the 3rd floor, we have the Stark bedroom with we have some of the Crittenton bedroom furniture up on the 3rd floor. We call it the Crittenton Room. And it's where Carrie slept. Now, Governor Crittenton was an interesting character. He's from the Kansas City area. And it was post-Civil War, and Jesse James had been killed. And his brother, Frank, no longer wanted to live the life of an outlaw. And so he reached out to Governor Crittenton and cut a deal. So here comes Frank James into Jefferson City on the train. He takes rooms at the motel, and all day and all night, people visit him from around town. Taking callers is what we used to call it. And so he was probably visited by the governor and Mrs. Crittenton, and he then comes over to either, and we have yet to be able to fully identify, right, John? Fully identify if it happened in the mansion or the Capitol, just says the governor's office, where Frank James turns his pistols in to the governor. It says, nobody's ever touched my pistols. Turns his pistols into the governor, gets back on the train, goes to Kansas City. He is arrested, but never convicted. Or convicted, but never. Anyway, he pretty much goes free. Now, what people don't know, so in the papers at the time, there was a lot of anger over the fact that Crittenton was letting either turn himself in or the fact that he was turning himself in. There was a lot of back and forth over it. What's interesting, though, somebody actually tried to break into the mansion to kill the governor. The First Lady was home during that time. Now we have security, you learn over the years. Anyway, they broke into it was a whole thing, a whole scandal in Missouri. You know how those things go. And it was a big problem. Anyway, Frank James goes back home, and what people don't realize is that the Crittenton family was a powerful family. Governor Crittenton's son was the mayor of Kansas City. But the James children actually worked for the Crittenton family for years and years. So there was actually kind of a close bond between the families. So I think that's an interesting piece of history. Now I'm going to share you one of mine. So I'm a little girl from Chicago. I was born up there. I've lived here most of my life, so I get to count it. I graduated high school here. But when I was up in Chicago with my grandmother, I'm a Dolan. She's a little Irish lady. And Irish ladies tell stories sometimes, right? So I'm up there, we're at a family barbecue, and my grandma tells me about Michael Dolan, who was my immigrant who came over from Ireland, about how he was in Jefferson City at the time that Frank James turned himself in. And literally, when he left, and this is the story that's coming from my grandmother, I didn't work at the mansion at the time, said that Frank James came out of the mansion and asked for a plug of tobacco, which my great-great-grandfather gave him. So that's kind of a cool family story. And so when I come in and learn this job and the history, what's amazing and so fun to be here with you all today, and what I've learned, is that history comes back around and reaches you in very personal ways. So I have this story, and so I start looking into the records and find that, yes, Michael was here. He was here working on the railroad. He was here for 9 years. I can find him in the census. He leaves before that. But my great-great-grandfather was born in Jefferson City, Missouri. So those family connections are incredibly, incredibly unique. The oldest piece of furniture in the governor's mansion is a sideboard given by Governor Edwards. Now, Governor Edwards was also, I guess we have all interesting characters that come through our governor's mansion, whether it's a governor, a first lady, family, or friends, or dignitaries, or regular Missourians. But anyway, he has the sideboard. There's only 2 of them. We do have confirmation. The other one is at the Hermitage in Nashville, Tennessee. And I visited the Hermitage a couple years ago. And has anybody been to the Hermitage? It's all plexiglass, right? You can't really peek in or you bonk your head. Well, I wanted to see this sideboard for myself, and I couldn't get to it. Well, I managed to talk one of the head docents. I have a docent in the room here today. I managed to talk one of my head docents into allowing me beyond the plexiglass to look at it. And it is an amazing thing. They match. Ours is a little smaller. Governor Edwards was a bachelor, and he lived pre this house. He lived in the second mansion, and he left the sideboard for us. It's the oldest piece that's been in the mansion continually. It is the oldest original piece to the mansion, but he actually left Jefferson City, caught gold fever, and ran out and lived in California, and spent his days out in California. So he's kind of an interesting person. So what we started to do with the book, I should focus on the book, that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about today, as we worked through the book, what we wanted to do is we wanted to share recipes that were not only beautiful, but also incredibly easy and simple to make. So George Washington Carver, we have his picture in the mansion. He is the oldest recipe in the book. He, of course, dealt with peanuts and all sorts of things. And so we actually pulled from his journals and from his writings his original recipes. Well, amazing enough, we could only find one that we could translate into being makeable today. A lot of the recipes we just didn't know how to recreate. And so he's the oldest recipe in the book. So then we started our tour of Missouri, and we thought, all right, Missouri, how do we do this? How do we break this apart and really think about it? So we go back and we started in the first state house in St. Charles, Missouri. And they have a restaurant there called Lewis and Clark. And so that's so we've really kind of tried to start at the beginning of Missouri and walk our way through the history, how people moved in, what the German corridor looked like. We really wanted to highlight the wine industry, which before Prohibition actually rivaled the Napa Valley region. And we wanted to look at award-winning wines. Then we moved into St. Louis and met with some people who are working on spirits. Missouri has a huge spirit industry. It's because of our water and our grains that they make great spirits. And so we wanted to take a walk on their trail and see how those producers did it. And so in the book, you're going to find their stories wrapped inside of that. The other thing, while we were in St. Louis, is we visited the Schnucks stores. And before they were the Schnucks stores, it was a Schnucks family business. And they actually were the first people, the Schnuck family, to create, I find this amazing, to create the pork steak. And why were they the first people? What they were trying to do is they were trying to find a cheaper cut of meat that could feed a population flooding in during the industrialization to be able to feed workers that they could afford and that would sustain families. And so they actually, the Schnuck family, created the pork steak that we see here in Missouri. Of course, it becomes very popular, but that is absolutely what they did. So we found that to be kind of interesting. So then we started to go south, and Missouri is well known not for their native trout, but for the trout industry that we have here. And so we wanted to understand why that was so important, not only to Missouri's economy, but also to our culture. And so you'll find a trout recipe in the book that really focuses on that. The other thing, as we headed south, was Hammond's walnuts. Has anybody ever collected walnuts? Yeah, fair. I had never seen it done, wasn't really aware of it. And so we go down and visit them. It's really kind of a cool thing. They have these instruments that you use that you can collect walnuts. People do it all over the state. It's a big thing. And they have a thriving walnut business, as you guys know. But on top of that, the thing that we found with Hammond's and telling their story was the fact that not only do they use the walnuts as food, but they use the shells and husks in industrial products. So that was a really interesting thing, and we wanted to tell that story. Well, while we were down there, we couldn't help ourselves. We had to go visit Branson and wanted to go visit a couple of families there to maybe take a couple of rides on some roller coasters or visit the big wheel thing that spins. It's escaping me. It's from Chicago that they brought it down. And so we go down there and we learn the story that a lot of Missourians know about Silver Dollar City, which is how it started. It's something very different today, but it really was started around a cave and a family and how that built an entire industry down in the Branson area. We, of course, then visited Johnny Morris and Top of the Rock and took a couple of his family recipes that they now use today in their restaurants and integrated them into the cookbook. So on this journey with the First Lady and my staff, we really were able to dig through and understand the importance of Missouri's waterways, its culture, how the diversification of the state in different areas really impacted certain things. We come up from Branson and we get to Springfield. And are you guys familiar with Springfield cashew chicken, right? It's a whole thing. Well, that was created by Mr. Leong, and he turned 100 years old, but passed away in 2020. But he created Springfield-style chicken because when he moved here to the United States, and specifically to Springfield, he wanted to cook for people and share his cuisine. But it was not something that the Springfield culture was able to kind of break through. It was incredibly hard for him to break into the market. And so he Americanized one of his dishes to create Springfield cashew chicken that then allowed him to build a company and really a brand for years to come. So his culture, he found a way to break down something through food to be able to share with Missourians. And so I think that's what's so interesting about this cookbook is that, and looking at food through this lens, is the fact that what food does is it breaks down barriers. It allows us to all come together, either around a table or with family, or in certain situations and really be able to sit down, have a meal, and share some stories. And that's what we do at the Governor's Mansion on a daily basis. Whether we're having legislative members in or people from industry, we sit down at a table, we share a meal, and we find solutions here in the state of Missouri to work together. And so being able to share this book with you guys, being able to travel with the First Lady and share it across the state has just been an amazing, amazing experience. And we're just thrilled to be able to share it with you guys in this 150th year for the mansion and 200th year for the state of Missouri. So does anybody, I know we're kind of tight on time and I need to check it, but does anybody have any questions? Perfect, thank you. Yes.
Was the dueling governor an abolitionist or pro-slavery?
He was an abolitionist. He was a hothead too. He was an Irishman, redheaded Irishman. Great question. Great question. What else? We've got some really, yes.
Are there upcoming events being planned at the governor's mansion?
There are. We have several upcoming events. We are going to, in September, we are actually celebrating the inaugural ball. It'll be outside. We didn't get to have it due to the virus, but that'll be on September 18th. And then we're having a big birthday in November, on November 11th, I believe is the date. We are opening, we're closed right now for tours. We are opening back up in September for a regular tour schedule. We will be masking and that kind of thing. So we're looking forward to get opened back up. We've actually been fairly closed. Like I said, the renovation in 2019 we closed. And then 2020 we needed to close. And so we're really, really itching to get people back in and be able to share the history and the stories with everybody.
Didn't Carolyn Bond do a cookbook?
Well, yes, Carolyn Bond did a cookbook. You know who else? Jean Carnahan, Senator Carnahan, one of our favorite. She has a food blog that I follow religiously, and she actually wrote she wrote a historical book that we use almost as a manual to this day.
Hi. Does the cookbook include any recipes that reflect the Native American culture or other ethnic identities in Missouri?
Yes, that's a great question. It does. We are heavily partnered with the Missouri Humanities Council. In fact, we're pleased to announce that Friends of the Missouri Governor's Mansion won the partnership award this year for the humanities. But they, of course, are really doing a lot of work and research on the trails that came through. And so we wanted to very much so tell those stories in the book. It's an important part of our history. These are pretty good. What else? What does the book cost? It's $40.
You said that you had a tour on the second floor. Did I understand? And when I was at the tour, we only got the first floor. This was a couple of weeks ago. Are you going to open the second floor back up for tours?
Yes. So because let me kind of tell you a little bit about how the building works today. Great question. I'm going to go back here real quick. $40, and the proceeds from that go to maintaining the mansion. But so underneath in the basement, that's the nerve center, where we have all sorts of different state agencies in there. So you have Capitol Police, you have Highway Patrol, you have Department of Natural Resources, Department of Corrections, as well as the First Lady's staff. So it's kind of this whole collaboration of people to make this little city on the hill run. Then on the first floor, that is the public tour floor. So when we open for general tours, it's on that first floor. And that floor is the historical part. The First Lady, and this is new, we haven't done this in years, but First Lady Parson has opened up the home on occasion to different groups. And we did one in 2019 where it was a big open house and we were able to bring people in. We haven't been able to do that as much. But yes, and so watch the First Lady's Facebook page because we will do that again, hopefully very soon. So, and it's beautiful. So you go up to the second floor, and that is actually their residence. That's where they live. Over time, when the building was first built, it didn't have bathrooms, it didn't have electricity, it didn't have running water. So as you can imagine, over the years, all of those have changed. And so they live on that floor. So when you go up those grand staircases, and I'll just walk you through it really quick, you run into the Stark bedroom. And in there is Stark family furniture. And you'll notice all the beds are really small because they're the old beds. Then you go into the First Lady's office. Then you go into the dining room, and this is my favorite, and there are pictures of it in the book, so you can see it. It is one of my favorite rooms in the house. It has hand-painted wallpaper, and it's gorgeous. Mrs. Blunt put it in, and we like to tell the story. It really is. It's just really beautiful. And so in the renovation, they had to cut through walls and floors to fix pipes. And our biggest concern was we were going to lose the wallpaper because it was so pretty. But we didn't. They were able to work around it. It's the only wall that was not touched in the renovation in any room in the mansion. And so it's hand painted, it's beautiful, it's got birds and native things. But if you close the door in the dining room, behind there is a sunflower. And that is a Kansas symbol. And let's just say Mrs. Blunt was not happy when she saw it, but we can open the door and you can't see it. So there's all those types of things. After you leave there, you go into the family's living room. You can tell the rooms are old, but they are modernized. So you have regular couches. You're not sitting on the settees and those types of things. And then you go in and that's their living space. And then you get to go out on the back porch. And it's beautiful to see it in different times of the year, whether it's snowing or the fall and the beautiful colors, but it's beautiful. And then up on the third floor is several bedrooms as well as the ballroom. And so they use that as a living space as well. Great question. Watch, because we are going to try to get it back open again. You cannot make a reservation online yet. You have to call Friends of the Missouri Governor's Mansion and get a reservation. We're just doing that temporarily because of COVID, because we want to keep our groups small. When we open back up, hopefully in September, there's some wood. Is this real wood? We're gonna want to open it back up, and you'll be able to make those reservations online again. It's just the way we have to kind of control the numbers a little bit to keep people safe.
So the renovations and the tours and all the things you do are very expensive, I know. So what are other ways that folks can help support the Friends of the Governor's Mansion?
They can become a member. Thank you, John. They can become a member. Yes, to give you guys a little bit of an idea. So Friends of the Missouri Governor's Mansion was actually created in 1976 by Carolyn Bond. And we were created to be able to raise money to invest not in the bricks and mortar, that's the responsibility of the state, but in the furniture and the carpets and all of that. In the past 2 years since the renovation, we've invested close to $340,000. And those are just a few things. Like we redid the 1904 World's Fair furniture. Our big investment right now is when you go into the first floor, like you were there a couple weeks ago, that you don't see in the double parlor, you will not see a carpet. That carpet was actually put in by First Lady Bond. And again, think about 50 to 70,000 visitors a year walking on those carpets. They lasted a long time, but it got so threadbare that people were kind of tripping. And so we had to remove it, but now the floor is not protected. And so that is a big investment. And then if you go in the library, that carpet we're hoping to replace too. Those two carpets are $120,000. Now they will last for 40 years, but they're very expensive. So become a member. Go to MissouriMansion.com and become a member. We would love to have you. And we keep you in the loop on all events that come up. You get to hear them first. Any other questions? Yes.
What are some of the gifts that former governors have given to the mansion?
Great question. Okay, so the first ones were the pillars, right, that they gave to the mansion. We've had the chandeliers that were given to the mansion. We had a big, beautiful, and this got taken down, but we got a big mansion on the back porch from the Holdens. That is actually being renovated because that sun comes right in and bleaches that the wood on that, so we're working on that. It was really great because that piece, we were able to actually share art from the best of Missouri hands at the mansion, and so we were able to display art back there. We have had donations of, Governor Governor Edwards, there we go. Stewart came after him. Governor Edwards gave us the sideboard. So all sorts of different pieces and parts over the years. And they rotate in and out sometimes, but they are there. But they always leave something. We do. We do. And not all of them are on the first floor. And they do have to kind of come in and out of renovation for certain pieces, furniture in some cases. But yes, there's gifts all throughout the home. I do love the fact that he did all of that work. Governor B. Gratz Brown did all that work to bring those pillars in, and they were the wrong size. But I hate to have been there that day.
Do you have a favorite recipe from the book and or the most interesting story of gathering that recipe for the book?
I do. And it's not a mansion recipe. So there is a recipe from Annie Gunn's in St. Louis. And if you guys can imagine, we really started collecting the recipes for the book in March of 2020 from the restaurants. So one of the things that happened right away was that the restaurant industry was heavily impacted during this time. And so as we were trying to get these recipes with people who were very, very busy, I was trying to find a recipe from Annie Gunn's. And it really, the process of doing this during that period of time really spoke a lot about the importance of humanity and the need to share stories and kind of come through all of this together. But I reached the sommelier, and he said, well, the chef is out, his dad is sick with COVID on a ventilator. And I said, I don't want to bother him at all. And he said, no, the chef would love to give you a recipe, but it's a really difficult time. And so that was a process where I actually got to know not only the sommelier during that difficult period of time, but also the chef, and his dad recovered. So I'll put that out there right away in case you were waiting for that shoe to drop. But being able to participate with him, I would send notes and cards and really kind of keep up with him. And he's back in and working. And he was going to give me just one of their throwaway recipes, but we'd built such a relationship. He said, what would you like? And I said, well, I love to cook. I'm a cook. I do love to cook. And I said, I love a good roast chicken. And he said, well, you haven't had a good roast chicken until you had mine. And so we went back into the restaurant. They were closed, and he roasted me a chicken. And it was a transformative experience, sitting there with him, knowing what he had been through, what they were all going through, and being able to just sit there with a simple roasted chicken and eat that with him and that's my favorite recipe. Any others? I think we have just a couple of minutes. We do not have Boone County ham, but we have several the question was, do we have Boone County ham in there? We don't have Boone County ham. What we did is we actually have a ham recipe from the place out in California, Missouri. The burgers. But we have several recipes in the book from Boone County. We do have beaten biscuits in there. Great question. The question was, do we have Annie's beaten biscuits? Beaten biscuits, if you have not heard, were actually a very large part of the culinary experience at the mansion. And they had a lady who was there for years and years who made those biscuits. And they finally got a beaten biscuit machine. And it was notorious. There's one at Lenore here, but you got to have a good beaten biscuit. And if you couldn't do a good beaten biscuit, you can't stay. You gots to go. Any other questions? Well, you guys, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here to celebrate not only the bicentennial with you today, but brought my family up. We're going to celebrate my birthday, which was yesterday, by going to one of those new restaurants here in Columbia. So anyway, you guys have a great day, and thank you for having me.